Marcus Daniels gripped the armrest as turbulence rocked the private jet. His company had just acquired SkyHigh Airlines, but the flight attendant who'd refused him a meal 6 months ago didn't recognize him in his tailored suit. "I'm sorry, sir, but we're out of the filet mignon," she said with the same dismissive smile he remembered. She had no idea he now owned the entire airline. As the plane touched down, Marcus opened his briefcase, revealing termination papers for the entire flight crew. Their careers were about to experience severe turbulence. Would justice finally be served at 30,000 feet? Before we begin this shocking story of discrimination and revenge, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. If you believe in standing up for justice against discrimination, hit that like button and subscribe to stay updated on more incredible true stories that will leave you speechless. 6 months earlier, Marcus Daniels slumped against the leather seat of his town car as it pulled up to Terminal B. At 42, the self-made tech billionaire and CEO of Pinnacle Innovations looked like any other exhausted business traveler. He just closed a major software deal that would revolutionize supply chain management across 3 continents. The last 18 hours had been a blur of negotiations, handshakes, and contract revisions. Now, all he wanted was to get home to Boston. "We're here, sir," his driver announced, pulling up to SkyHigh Airlines first-class check-in. Marcus nodded, grabbed his briefcase, and headed inside. Despite his fortune, he preferred traveling with minimal fuss. Today he wore simple dark jeans, a plain black sweater, and comfortable sneakers. His wealth wasn't something he flaunted with flashy clothes or accessories. At the first-class counter, he presented his ID and boarding pass to a smiling attendant, who quickly processed his documents. "Enjoy your flight, Mr. Daniels." Security was equally smooth. Being a frequent flyer had its perks. Within 30 minutes of arriving at the airport, Marcus was approaching the gate where SkyHigh's premium passengers were already lining up. That's when things changed. "First-class passengers may now board," announced the gate agent. Marcus stepped forward alongside 3 other passengers, all white executives in business attire. The flight attendant checking boarding passes, a blonde woman with Veronica Walsh on her name tag, smiled warmly at the group. When the others presented their passes, she nodded respectfully and waved them through. When Marcus presented his, the smile vanished. "I need to see your boarding pass again," Veronica said, her voice suddenly formal. Marcus handed it over. "Is there a problem?" She examined it with exaggerated scrutiny. "This is a first-class boarding pass." "Yes, it is," Marcus confirmed calmly. "Are you sure you're at the right gate?" Her eyebrows arched skeptically. By now, a small line had formed behind Marcus. People were watching the exchange. "I'm positive," Marcus replied. "Boston, Flight 473, first class, seat 2A. Veronica's lips tightened. "One moment, please." She stepped away and whispered to another crew member while glancing back at Marcus. A security officer approached. "Is there an issue here?" "This gentleman is attempting to board in first class," Veronica explained, emphasizing "gentleman" in a way that made it sound suspect. The security officer turned to Marcus. "May I see your ID and boarding pass, sir?" Meanwhile, Veronica continued processing other passengers, including several who had arrived after Marcus. "I've already shown my ID at the counter and security," Marcus explained. "And I just presented my boarding pass." "We need to verify, sir," the officer insisted. Marcus produced his driver's license and boarding pass again. The officer compared them, looked at Marcus, then back at the documents. "I'll also need a secondary form of identification." The request was unusual. Marcus noticed none of the white passengers had been asked for additional verification. Still, he maintained his composure and produced his corporate ID card. After what seemed like an unnecessary delay, the officer finally nodded. "He's clear." By now, most of the first-class cabin had boarded. Marcus walked down the jetway, acutely aware of the stares from fellow passengers who had witnessed the scene. As he settled into seat 2A, he noticed several curious glances from those already aboard. Flight attendant Veronica entered the cabin, warmly greeting other first-class passengers by name or with genuine smiles. When she reached Marcus, her expression chilled. No welcome, no offer to take his jacket, just a curt nod before moving on. The first-class cabin quickly filled, and soon the door closed. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Good afternoon, folks. This is Captain Richard Hayes welcoming you aboard SkyHigh Airlines Flight 473 to Boston. We're expecting a smooth ride today with an on-time arrival." As the plane taxied, Marcus tried to put the boarding incident behind him. Perhaps he was being oversensitive. Perhaps Veronica was just having a bad day. He opened his laptop to review some work documents, determined to use the 3-hour flight productively. Once they reached cruising altitude, the cabin crew began meal service. Marcus watched as Veronica worked her way methodically through the cabin, offering passengers their choice between filet mignon or grilled salmon. She collected orders from everyone in the first 2 rows except Marcus, then disappeared into the galley. When she returned with the meals, she served everyone who had ordered the filet first. The presentation was immaculate, the service attentive. She refilled drinks, offered fresh bread, and checked if anything else was needed. Finally, she approached Marcus. "And what would you like for your meal today?" she asked, her tone noticeably less warm than with other passengers. "I'll have the filet, please," Marcus replied. Veronica's face tightened into what seemed like a practiced expression of regret. "I'm so sorry, sir. It appears we've run out of the filet option. We only have the salmon left." Marcus glanced around. He had distinctly heard several passengers seated after him order and receive the filet. One gentleman had just been served moments before. "That's strange," Marcus observed. "The gentleman behind me just received the filet." "He pre-ordered," Veronica responded quickly. "We prioritize pre-orders." "I see. And did everyone else who received the filet pre-order as well?" Veronica's smile hardened. "Sir, I can offer you the salmon or nothing at all. Those are your options." Marcus knew when he was being discriminated against. He'd faced it before, though rarely so blatantly. In a premium service environment, he discreetly took out his phone and began recording. "I didn't pre-order because your website didn't indicate it was necessary," Marcus explained calmly. "I'm curious why you served filet to every other passenger in first class, including those who boarded after me, but suddenly ran out when you reached me." "Are you accusing me of something?" Veronica's voice rose slightly. "I'm simply asking why I'm receiving different service than other passengers. If you have a complaint, you can file it with customer service after we land," she snapped. "Now, salmon or nothing?" "I'd like to speak with the head flight attendant or the captain," Marcus requested. "I am the head flight attendant on this flight," Veronica replied, "and I don't appreciate your tone." "My tone has been perfectly reasonable," Marcus pointed out, still recording. "I'm simply asking why I'm receiving different treatment." "Bye." Now other passengers were watching the exchange. Some appeared uncomfortable, others curious. A few seemed to recognize the situation for what it was. "Is there a problem here?" A tall man in a pilot's uniform approached. Captain Richard Hayes had emerged from the cockpit. "This passenger is being difficult about the meal options," Veronica explained before Marcus could speak. Captain Hayes turned to Marcus with an expression of authority. "Sir, our flight attendants work hard to provide excellent service. If they say we're out of an option, then we're out." "Captain, I've been observing the service," Marcus replied calmly. "Every single first-class passenger received their first choice of meal except me. This happened after I was singled out for extra scrutiny during boarding. I find it hard to believe this is coincidental." The captain's face darkened. "Are you suggesting my crew is discriminating against you?" "That's a serious accusation. I'm stating facts. Your crew member required additional ID verification from me that wasn't required of other passengers. She skipped me during meal orders, then claimed to be out of the option that continued to be served to others after me. Sir, if you continue to disrupt this flight, I'll be forced to take measures," Captain Hayes warned. "I can have security meet us at our destination." Marcus maintained his composure. "I'm not disrupting anything, Captain. I'm sitting quietly in my seat requesting the same service other passengers are receiving." "He's been recording us," Veronica suddenly accused, pointing at Marcus's phone. "That's not allowed during flight. Hayes stated firmly. Actually, I checked SkyHigh's policies before boarding, Marcus countered. Recording is permitted as long as it doesn't interfere with crew duties or violate others' privacy. I'm simply documenting my own experience. The standoff continued for several uncomfortable moments. Finally, Captain Hayes spoke. Take the salmon or go hungry. Those are your options. And put that phone away or I'll confiscate it upon landing. As they walked away, Marcus heard Veronica whisper to the captain. Some people think first class means they can act entitled. Rather than escalate the situation further, Marcus accepted the salmon. He ate little of it, his appetite diminished by the encounter. Instead, he focused on his phone, typing a message to his executive team. Looking for a new investment opportunity, his text read. Research SkyHigh Airlines financial status. Immediately. As the plane began its descent into Boston, Marcus stared out the window, his mind racing. He could file a complaint, certainly. He could share the recording on social media and create a PR nightmare for SkyHigh. But those actions would be temporary discomforts for the airline. Marcus Daniels hadn't built a tech empire by thinking small. If SkyHigh Airlines had a discrimination problem, perhaps it needed new ownership, new leadership, a complete overhaul. The plane touched down smoothly, and passengers began collecting their belongings. As Marcus prepared to disembark, Veronica gave him the same dismissive smile she'd worn throughout the flight. "Thank you for flying SkyHigh," she said insincerely. "We hope you had a pleasant experience." Marcus smiled back, a plan already forming. "Oh, I'll definitely be flying SkyHigh again," he promised. "Sooner than you might expect." 2 days after the incident, Marcus sat at the head of Pinnacle Innovation's expansive conference table, watching his executive team file in for their weekly strategy meeting. The wall of windows behind him framed Boston's skyline, a testament to how far he'd come from his humble beginnings in South Chicago. "Before we discuss quarterly projections," Marcus announced once everyone was settled, "I want to explore a new acquisition opportunity." His chief financial officer, Eliza Washington, raised an eyebrow. "Another software company?" "No," Marcus replied, pressing a button on his tablet. The room's main screen displayed the SkyHigh Airlines logo. An airline. The surprise was evident on every face. Pinnacle was a tech company specializing in AI and logistics software. An airline seemed completely unrelated to their core business. "I've had our research team doing a deep dive into SkyHigh's financials," Marcus continued. "They're struggling. Passenger numbers down 12% year over year. Stock price at a 5-year low. 3 consecutive quarters of losses." "Why are we interested in a failing airline?" asked James Chen, head of business development. Marcus recounted his experience on the SkyHigh flight, keeping his tone matter-of-fact despite the anger he still felt reliving it. "So this is personal," Eliza observed when he finished. "It's both business and personal," Marcus corrected. "SkyHigh has valuable roots, a decent fleet, and strong brand recognition despite recent struggles. With proper management and our logistics expertise, we could turn it around. And yes, I'd take personal satisfaction in transforming a company that allows such behavior." "Social media would be easier," suggested Kieran O'Malley, their marketing director. "One post with that recording and they'd be doing damage control for months." Marcus shook his head. "That might shame one flight attendant or even get her fired. It wouldn't change the culture that made her feel comfortable behaving that way in the first place." "An acquisition of this scale would take significant resources," Eliza cautioned. "Resources that could be invested in our core business." "I've considered that," Marcus acknowledged, "which is why I'm proposing a staged approach. We begin by quietly acquiring shares without triggering reporting requirements. Once we have a meaningful position, we'll accelerate our purchases to gain controlling interest." The discussion continued for hours. Some executives questioned whether Marcus's judgment was clouded by his personal experience. Others worried about the distraction from their core business. A few saw potential strategic benefits in diversifying their portfolio. By meeting's end, Marcus had convinced enough of his team to proceed. Over the next 3 months, Pinnacle would gradually position itself to take control of SkyHigh Airlines. "One last thing," Marcus added as the meeting concluded. Absolute. Confidentiality is essential. If SkyHigh's management realizes what we're doing, they'll take defensive measures that could make this much more expensive or even impossible. The acquisition plan unfolded methodically over the next 12 weeks. Pinnacle created shell companies to purchase small blocks of SkyHigh stock, staying under the radar of financial regulators. Meanwhile, Marcus assigned a team to develop a comprehensive post-acquisition strategy for the airline. What were your first thoughts when you saw how Marcus was treated on that flight? Comment number 1 if you think he should have immediately reported Veronica to management, or number 2 if his strategic response of buying the airline was more satisfying. Don't forget to hit that like button if you're loving this story of justice in the making, and subscribe for more incredible true stories of people standing up against discrimination. Would you have the patience and strategic thinking to plan such an elaborate response, or would your anger have gotten the best of you? Let's see what happens next when the tables begin to turn. By the second month, Pinnacle had acquired nearly 15% of SkyHigh's outstanding shares, still not enough for control, but significant enough that Marcus could begin placing allies within the company. A consultant here, an advisor there, each providing valuable intelligence while preserving the secrecy of the overall plan. SkyHigh's management is starting to notice unusual trading patterns, reported Eliza during their update meeting. Their CFO has ordered an investigation into recent stock purchases. Let's create some distractions, Marcus decided. Leak rumors about interest from foreign airlines or private equity firms. Give them false trails to follow. The diversion worked. SkyHigh's executives spent weeks chasing phantoms, while Pinnacle continued its methodical acquisition. By the end of the third month, they had secured over 30% of the airline's stock. One major push and we'll have controlling interest, Marcus told his team. Time to accelerate. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. SkyHigh had just announced another disappointing quarter, driving their stock price even lower. Pinnacle swooped in, purchasing large blocks of shares at bargain prices. The night before the final acquisition phase, Marcus sat alone in his penthouse office reviewing the plan one last time. Everything was in place. By this time tomorrow, he would effectively control SkyHigh Airlines. With a sense of satisfaction, he opened his laptop and navigated to SkyHigh's website. It was time to book another first-class ticket. Marcus didn't expect the direct message that appeared in his private social media account 3 days after he'd booked his second SkyHigh flight. Most people couldn't reach him through this channel. His team carefully filtered his communications. Mr. Daniels, the message read, "My name is Aisha Jefferson. I'm a flight attendant with SkyHigh. I witnessed how my colleague Veronica treated you on Flight 473 2 months ago. I wanted to apologize for not speaking up then. I was afraid of retaliation. If you're willing to talk, I have information you should know." Marcus studied the profile. Aisha appeared legitimate. Her account showed a history of employment with SkyHigh and connections to other airline staff. Still, he approached with caution. "Ms. Jefferson," he replied, "thank you for reaching out. What kind of information do you have?" Her response came quickly. "Not something I'm comfortable sharing here. Could we meet somewhere public?" They arranged to meet at a busy coffee shop in downtown Boston the following day. Marcus arrived early, choosing a corner table with a view of the entrance. He recognized Aisha immediately when she walked in, her SkyHigh uniform partially concealed under an open coat. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. Her hands nervously wrapped around her coffee cup. "I'm risking my job by being here." "I appreciate that," Marcus acknowledged. "What was so important you needed to tell me in person?" Aisha took a deep breath. "What happened to you wasn't an isolated incident. Veronica Walsh and Captain Hayes have a pattern of treating passengers of color differently. Many of us have seen it, but when we report it to management, nothing happens." "You have proof of this?" Marcus asked. Aisha nodded and discreetly slid a USB drive across the table. "Incident reports that mysteriously disappear from the system. Passenger complaints that get buried. I've been documenting everything for the past year." Marcus pocketed the drive. "Why are you sharing this with me specifically?" "Because you recorded what happened," she explained. "Most passengers don't. And frankly, Because you have resources. After you left the plane, I overheard Veronica and the captain laughing about putting you in your place. They had no idea who you were. And you do? I looked you up after the flight. Pinnacle Innovations isn't exactly a small company, Mr. Daniels. Marcus studied her expression, looking for any sign of deception. What do you want in return for this information, Ms. Jefferson? Justice, she said simply. Not just for you, but for every passenger who's been mistreated. For the employees who've been silenced. SkyHigh has a toxic culture that starts at the top. Over the next hour, Aisha shared disturbing details about SkyHigh's operations. How certain crew members specifically targeted minority passengers for extra scrutiny or reduced service. How complaints were systematically buried by a management team that either condoned the behavior or feared addressing it. I can connect you with other passengers who've had similar experiences, Aisha offered. People who filed complaints that went nowhere. That would be helpful, Marcus agreed, making a decision. Aisha, what I'm about to tell you must remain absolutely confidential. He explained Pinnacle's ongoing acquisition of SkyHigh, watching her eyes widen with each detail. You're buying the entire airline because of how they treated you. She asked, incredulous. I'm buying an undervalued company with significant potential, Marcus corrected. That it happens to be a company with a discrimination problem I can fix is, let's call it a bonus. As they wrapped up their meeting, a woman at a nearby table kept glancing in their direction. Aisha tensed when she noticed. That's Janet Wilson, she whispered. She works in SkyHigh's scheduling department. If she recognizes me talking to you, follow my lead, Marcus murmured, then raised his voice slightly. So as I was saying, Ms. Jefferson, Pinnacle is always looking for talented professionals with airline experience for our corporate travel department. Your resume is impressive. We'll be in touch about next steps. Aisha caught on immediately, standing and extending her hand. Thank you for considering my application, Mr. Daniels. I look forward to hearing from your HR team. They exchanged business cards in full view of the curious onlooker, completing the illusion of a job interview. As Aisha left, Marcus noticed Janet Wilson hurriedly typing on her phone. The cover story might buy them some time, but he knew suspicions had been raised. The following day, Aisha sent an encrypted message. My supervisor called me in today, accused me of corporate espionage. Said a reliable source saw me meeting with a tech executive. They're threatening termination. Marcus replied immediately. Don't worry, deny everything. Say you were exploring career options, nothing more. We're accelerating our timeline. Just hold on a little longer. What Aisha didn't know was that Marcus had already begun reviewing the evidence she provided. The USB drive contained dozens of passenger complaints describing discriminatory treatment, internal emails discussing how to manage these complaints, and even performance reviews praising certain staff for maintaining standards in ways that seemed coded to reward discriminatory behavior. Most disturbing were the patterns involving Veronica Walsh and Captain Richard Hayes. They frequently worked together on premium routes and had multiple complaints against them, yet both had received promotions and commendations. With this new information, Marcus modified his acquisition strategy. It wasn't enough to simply gain control of SkyHigh. He needed to build a case strong enough to justify sweeping changes once he took over. Marcus was reviewing acquisition documents when Eliza burst into his office without knocking, a rare breach of protocol that immediately signaled trouble. They know, she announced breathlessly, placing her tablet in front of him. On the screen was a confidential memo from SkyHigh's CEO to their board of directors. Potential hostile takeover attempt by Pinnacle Innovations. How did they find out? Marcus demanded, scanning the document. We're not sure, Eliza admitted. But it gets worse. They've called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning to discuss defensive measures. Marcus leaned back, mind racing. Who's your source for this? Remember that financial analyst we placed as a consultant in their accounting department? They forwarded this after it accidentally appeared in a shared drive. Within the hour, Marcus had assembled his core acquisition team. The mood in the conference room was tense as they assessed the damage. They know we're accumulating shares, reported James Chen, but they don't seem aware of how much we already control. That gives us an advantage, Marcus noted. What defensive measures are they likely to consider? The classic poison pill is most probable, said their legal counsel, Sofia Rodriguez. They'll dilute the stock by allowing existing shareholders to purchase additional shares at a discount, making our acquisition much more expensive. Can we prevent it? Not entirely, Sofia admitted, but we can accelerate our purchases to secure a larger position before they implement it. Do it, Marcus ordered. Use every shell company and investment vehicle we've established. I want maximum shares acquired before their board meets tomorrow. As Pinnacle scrambled to outmaneuver SkyHigh's defenses, Captain Richard Hayes was leading his own counterattack. Though not a board member, Hayes had connections throughout the airline and a vested interest in maintaining the status quo. That evening, Marcus received an alert from his media monitoring team. Several business news outlets were running stories questioning Pinnacle's financial stability and Marcus's leadership. The sources were anonymous but claimed insider knowledge of the company. They're trying to drive down our stock price, Marcus realized, watching Pinnacle shares dip in after-hours trading. Make us less able to complete the acquisition. The attack didn't stop there. By morning, tabloid websites were running stories with headlines like Tech CEO's Violent Temper, Former Associates Speak Out, and Pinnacle Innovations, the toxic workplace behind the glossy facade. None of the allegations had substance, but the sheer volume of negative coverage was having an impact. Investors were calling, partners were expressing concern, and even some of Pinnacle's board members were questioning whether the SkyHigh acquisition was worth the backlash. This is coordinated, Marcus told his team during their emergency response meeting. SkyHigh is fighting dirty. We should back off, suggested one board member via video conference. This is damaging our core business. Backing off is exactly what they want, Marcus countered. If we retreat now, we not only lose the investment we've already made in SkyHigh shares, but we show every future competitor that we can be scared away by a few negative stories. Despite the pressure, Marcus doubled down. He authorized additional resources for the acquisition, accelerated their timeline, and personally called key investors to reassure them. Meanwhile, SkyHigh implemented their poison pill strategy, making each additional share Pinnacle acquired significantly more expensive. They also filed regulatory complaints alleging that Pinnacle was violating securities laws by not properly disclosing their acquisition attempts. The battle escalated when Marcus discovered, through Aisha's continued intelligence, that Captain Hayes was not merely a pilot with discriminatory practices. He was the brother-in-law of William Nordstrom, one of the regulatory officials assigned to review the complaints against Pinnacle. That's a clear conflict of interest, Marcus told his legal team. Nordstrom should have recused himself. It gives us leverage, Sofia agreed. But we need concrete proof of the relationship before we can formally challenge his involvement. While Pinnacle's investigators worked to document the Hayes-Nordstrom connection, SkyHigh's CEO made a bold public statement. We will use every legal means at our disposal to prevent a hostile takeover by entities that know nothing about the airline industry and seek only to dismantle a proud American company for parts. The statement resonated with SkyHigh employees, many of whom began publicly opposing the acquisition without knowing the full story. Social media campaigns with hashtags like Teicher Save SkyHigh and Pinnacle Predators gained traction. They're painting us as corporate raiders, Kieran reported during their daily crisis meeting. The narrative is that we're tech bros trying to destroy a legacy airline. Then we change the narrative, Marcus decided. It's time to be more strategic about what information reaches the public. That afternoon, without identifying the source, Pinnacle leaked selected documents from Aisha's evidence to trusted journalists. Stories began appearing about SkyHigh's history of discrimination complaints and the management culture that protected problematic employees. The corporate battle had become a public relations war, with both sides maneuvering for advantage. SkyHigh's stock price fluctuated wildly as investors tried to determine which way the wind was blowing. Through it all, Marcus kept his focus on the end goal. When his team finally uncovered documentary proof of the Hayes-Nordstrom relationship, holiday photos from a family reunion posted on a relative's public social media account, he immediately filed a formal complaint demanding Nordstrom's recusal from any matters involving Pinnacle and SkyHigh. The pressure worked. Within 48 hours, Nordstrom announced he would step aside from the case to avoid any appearance of impropriety, though he denied any actual conflict of interest. It was the first major victory in what had become a much more complicated acquisition than Marcus had initially planned. But with Nordstrom out of the picture, the regulatory roadblocks began to clear. With Nordstrom's recusal, Marcus expected the regulatory review to proceed smoothly. Instead, the case was reassigned to Deputy Commissioner Eleanor Graves, known for her meticulous scrutiny of corporate acquisitions. The regulatory review is officially on hold, Sophia announced during their morning briefing. Graves has issued a formal request for additional documentation regarding our acquisition strategy and intent. What's their justification? Marcus asked, frustration evident in his voice. They're citing potential industry consolidation concerns and questions about Pinnacle's long-term commitment to maintaining air service. Sophia placed a thick document on the table. This request for information is extensive. They're asking for everything from our post-acquisition business plans to 5 years of Pinnacle's board meeting minutes. Marcus studied the document. This feels like a delay tactic. It absolutely is, Sophia confirmed. SkyHigh likely has connections within the regulatory agency. They can't stop us outright, but they can slow us down, drive up our costs, and hope we eventually abandon the effort. Marcus leaned back, considering their options. How long can they delay us? Months, potentially. Each round of questions could take weeks to resolve. That's unacceptable. We need to change the conversation. Marcus turned to his communications director. Let's shift focus to why we're pursuing this acquisition. It's time to make SkyHigh's discrimination problem public. Over the next few days, Pinnacle's legal team carefully compiled evidence from Aisha's files, supplemented by testimonies Marcus had gathered from other SkyHigh passengers who had experienced discrimination. The documentation painted a damning picture of systemic problems that extended far beyond one flight attendant or captain. Rather than releasing everything at once, Pinnacle strategically shared the information with civil rights organizations and consumer advocacy groups. These independent entities could raise concerns about SkyHigh's practices without appearing to be directly connected to the acquisition battle. The strategy worked. Within a week, 3 prominent civil rights organizations had announced investigations into SkyHigh's treatment of minority passengers. Consumer complaints on social media multiplied as more passengers felt emboldened to share their negative experiences. Meanwhile, inside SkyHigh, the pressure was building. Aisha had connected Marcus with Terrence Washington, a mid-level manager in SkyHigh's customer service department who had been silently documenting discrimination complaints for years. I've tried raising these issues internally, Terrence explained during their confidential meeting. Every time, I'm told it's being handled appropriately, or that I should focus on my own responsibilities. The documents Terrence provided were explosive. Internal emails explicitly directing customer service representatives to offer lower compensation to minority passengers filing complaints. Performance reviews penalizing employees who overcompensated these passengers. Training materials that subtly reinforced racial profiling under the guise of security protocols. This goes beyond a few bad employees, Marcus realized. This is institutional. With Terrence's permission, Marcus shared the internal documents with Eleanor Graves, framing Pinnacle's acquisition attempt as a necessary intervention to address discriminatory practices that current management was unwilling or unable to correct. The story broke nationally when a prominent business journal published an investigative piece titled, "The Two Tiers of SkyHigh. Former Employees Reveal Pattern of Discrimination." The article featured anonymous testimonies from multiple current and former SkyHigh employees, including detailed accounts of how complaints were systematically buried. Public pressure mounted. Hashtags like Charter Ground SkyHigh and Discrimination has no wings trended on social media. Politicians began weighing in, with several congressional representatives calling for formal hearings on discrimination in the airline industry. SkyHigh's management attempted to dismiss the allegations as disgruntled employee complaints or incidents taken out of context. They emphasized their official non-discrimination policies and diversity initiatives. But the evidence was too substantial. The pattern too clear to be easily dismissed. Have you ever witnessed discrimination but felt powerless to stop it? Comment number 1. If you admire whistleblowers like Aisha and Terrence who risk their jobs to expose injustice. Or number 2. If you think they should have tried harder to fix the system from within. Like this video if you believe corporate accountability matters, and subscribe to support more stories about taking a stand against discrimination. What would you do if you were in Marcus's position? Push forward despite the obstacles or settle for a less risky solution? The regulatory battle is heating up, but is Marcus about to face an even bigger challenge? As public pressure intensified, Eleanor Graves expedited the regulatory review process. Her office requested a private meeting with Marcus and his legal team. Mr. Daniels, she began once they were seated in her austere government office. I'll be direct. The discrimination allegations against SkyHigh are disturbing and merit investigation. However, that's separate from our responsibility to ensure this acquisition complies with federal regulations. I understand, Marcus replied. We've submitted all required documentation demonstrating that this acquisition won't harm competition or consumer choice. Yes, your documentation is in order, Graves acknowledged. My remaining concern is whether Pinnacle has the necessary expertise to operate an airline. Marcus was prepared for this question. We've already secured commitments from several experienced airline executives who will join the leadership team post-acquisition. Additionally, our technology platforms can significantly improve SkyHigh's operational efficiency and customer experience. The meeting continued for nearly 2 hours, with Graves pressing Marcus on everything from route maintenance to labor relations. When they finally emerged, Sophia was cautiously optimistic. She's thorough but fair, she assessed. I think we made progress. 3 days later, they received notification that William Nordstrom had filed a formal complaint alleging Marcus had orchestrated a smear campaign against him to force his recusal. He's claiming I fabricated the relationship between him and Hayes, Marcus said incredulously after reading the complaint. It's a desperate move, Sophia assured him. We have documented evidence of their connection. Indeed, within hours of Pinnacle submitting their evidence, Nordstrom amended his complaint to acknowledge the relationship, but claimed it was distant and didn't influence his professional judgment. The next day, news broke that Nordstrom had formally recused himself from all matters related to airline regulation, effectively ending his involvement in the case. Anonymous sources within the agency reported he had been pressured to step down after the extent of his relationship with Hayes became clear to his superiors. It was a significant victory for Pinnacle, clearing the final regulatory hurdle. Within 24 hours, Eleanor Graves issued preliminary approval for the acquisition, pending standard closing conditions. SkyHigh's stock price plummeted as investors recognized that the takeover was now virtually inevitable. Pinnacle seized the opportunity to acquire additional shares at depressed prices, further strengthening their position. By week's end, Marcus had secured enough shares to effectively control SkyHigh Airlines. The battle had been longer and more brutal than anticipated, but the outcome was sweet. Now came the challenging part: transforming a company with deeply entrenched cultural problems. 6 months after his fateful first-class flight, Marcus stood before a packed auditorium of SkyHigh employees. Behind him, a new logo displayed the airline's name with Pinnacle's distinctive blue accent color. Today marks the beginning of a new era for SkyHigh, Marcus announced. Under Pinnacle's ownership, we will transform this airline into an industry leader in both operational excellence and customer experience. The audience response was mixed. Polite applause mingled with uncertain murmurs. Marcus understood their anxiety. Acquisitions often meant layoffs, restructuring, and cultural upheaval. Let me address your concerns directly, he continued. First, we're not planning mass layoffs. We're investing in this airline, not stripping it down. Second, while there will be changes to leadership and certain policies, we value the expertise and dedication of the SkyHigh team. What Marcus didn't explicitly state was that the most significant changes would target the discriminatory practices that had motivated the acquisition in the first place. That process had already begun, with the removal of several executives who had enabled or covered up these practices. After the town hall, Marcus met with his transition team in SkyHigh's former boardroom, now repurposed as their command center. "How are we progressing with the integration plan?" he asked. "Mixed results," reported Eliza. "IT systems integration is proceeding well. Our logistics software is already identifying efficiency improvements in route planning and maintenance scheduling." "But," Marcus prompted, sensing hesitation. "But we're facing significant resistance in certain departments. Some managers are slow-walking implementation, claiming airline-specific complexities whenever we propose changes." "Which departments specifically?" "Flight operations is the biggest challenge. Captain Hayes has significant influence there. Though he's no longer in a formal leadership position, he's been with SkyHigh for 25 years and has cultivated strong loyalty networks." Marcus nodded, unsurprised. "Any issues with the flight attendant teams?" "Similar pattern. We've implemented new service standards and anti-discrimination training, but compliance is inconsistent. Some crews embrace the changes, others find ways to maintain their old practices. The resistance wasn't entirely unexpected. Cultural change never happened overnight, especially in an industry as traditional as commercial aviation." Still, Marcus had hoped for more progress by this point. As the meeting continued, Aisha Jefferson, now promoted to Director of Cabin Services, joined them with concerning news. "We're seeing a pattern of service disruptions," she reported. "Delayed flights, baggage handling issues, catering mix-ups. Individually, each could be explained as normal operational challenges, but together, they suggest coordinated sabotage." "Do we have proof?" Marcus asked. "Nothing definitive yet," Aisha admitted. "But these incidents disproportionately affect flights where we've placed supportive managers or implemented new procedures." Marcus frowned. "Assign our best people to investigate. I want evidence, not just suspicion." The transition continued, with each day bringing new challenges. Customer satisfaction surveys showed improvement overall, but with significant variability. Flights operated by crews embracing the new culture received excellent ratings, while others lagged behind. 3 weeks into the integration, the situation deteriorated sharply. An anonymous report was submitted to the Federal Aviation Administration alleging that Pinnacle's new procedures compromised safety protocols. "This is a direct attack," Marcus told his executive team after learning of the report. "They're targeting our integrity and trying to trigger regulatory intervention." Before they could formulate a response, the situation escalated further. Media outlets received anonymous tips about serious safety concerns at SkyHigh following the Pinnacle acquisition. The airline stock took a hit as travelers began canceling bookings. "We need to identify who's behind this," Marcus insisted. Their investigation didn't have to look far. Digital forensic experts traced the anonymous safety report to a computer regularly used by Captain Richard Hayes. While not conclusive proof of his involvement, it was highly suggestive. The situation came to a head when the FAA announced a special audit of SkyHigh's operations in response to the safety complaints. Such audits were serious matters that could potentially ground aircraft or restrict routes if significant issues were found. This is exactly what they wanted, Marcus Yao realized. They couldn't block the acquisition through regulatory channels, so now they're trying to destroy the airline from within. The audit team arrived unannounced at SkyHigh's main maintenance facility early on a Monday morning. What should have been a routine, if intensive review process quickly turned problematic. They're finding documentation discrepancies in maintenance records, reported the operations director. Records showing maintenance procedures that don't match our actual protocols. "Are these legitimate issues?" Marcus asked. "No. Someone has clearly tampered with the records. The physical aircraft are perfectly maintained according to all required standards, but the paperwork has been altered to create the appearance of irregularities." News of the audit leaked to the press within hours, exactly as the saboteurs had intended. Headlines questioning SkyHigh's safety under new management appeared across business publications and travel sites. Bookings plummeted overnight. Marcus called an emergency board meeting to address the crisis. Some Pinnacle board members who had been skeptical of the acquisition from the start now voice their concerns openly. "This is becoming a liability for our core business," argued one director. "Technology clients are questioning our judgment. We should consider divesting and cutting our losses." "Selling now would be disastrous," Marcus countered. "We'd take a massive financial hit, and, more importantly, we'd be abandoning the cultural transformation we've initiated." Despite his arguments, pressure mounted. Several major investors called directly, expressing concerns about Pinnacle's stock price, which had declined 15% since the safety allegations emerged. "Perhaps you should consider stepping back from day-to-day management of SkyHigh," suggested one significant shareholder. "Your personal involvement may be clouding your business judgment." Marcus refused to back down. "I believe in what we're doing here. Give me 60 days to resolve these issues before considering any drastic measures." He secured the temporary reprieve, but knew he was now operating on borrowed time. The acquisition that had begun as a response to personal discrimination had evolved into a battle for his professional reputation and possibly his leadership of Pinnacle itself. That evening, alone in his office, Marcus called Aisha. "We need to accelerate our investigation into the sabotage. I'm bringing in outside help." The next morning, a team of former FBI agents specializing in corporate investigations arrived at SkyHigh headquarters. Working with absolute discretion, they began systematically reviewing communications, access logs, and personnel movements. Meanwhile, Marcus implemented his loyalty test strategy. He deliberately shared different versions of potential new policies with various department heads, each containing subtle, unique elements. Then he waited to see which versions leaked to the resistance groups. The strategy quickly bore fruit. Within days, they had identified several key figures in the sabotage network. Most were middle managers with long tenures at SkyHigh, but the evidence confirmed their suspicions about the leadership. Veronica Walsh and Captain Richard Hayes were coordinating the resistance effort. Armed with this knowledge, Marcus prepared his counteroffensive. But rather than immediately confronting the saboteurs, he decided on a more strategic approach. He would use their own tactics against them, and in the process, gather irrefutable evidence of their misconduct. The FAA safety audit team worked methodically through SkyHigh's maintenance records, operations procedures, and training protocols. Despite the saboteurs' efforts to plant evidence of violations, the audit was proceeding more favorably than Marcus had anticipated. They're finding the discrepancies, but they're also noting that the actual aircraft and procedures are impeccable, reported the operations director. Their lead inspector specifically mentioned that the physical evidence contradicts the documentation issues. Still, the damage to SkyHigh's reputation continued. Anonymous safety whistleblowers kept feeding stories to the press, creating the impression of a struggling airline cutting corners under new management. Bookings had dropped 30%. Online travel agencies were prominently displaying the consumer warning designations that appeared automatically when airlines faced regulatory scrutiny. Each day of negative publicity cost millions in lost revenue. Pinnacle's board was growing increasingly impatient. During their weekly call, the criticism was direct. "The acquisition is now officially a disaster," stated the lead independent director bluntly. "Our stock is down 20%. Technology partners are questioning our stability. Even if you manage to fix SkyHigh, the damage to Pinnacle may be irreparable." "I understand your concerns," Marcus acknowledged. "But we're closer to resolving this than you realize. Our investigation has identified the source of the sabotage." "Then terminate them immediately," the director demanded. "It's not that simple," Marcus explained. "We need irrefutable evidence that will stand up to legal scrutiny. These individuals have been with SkyHigh for decades. Wrongful termination suits would only extend the damage." After securing one final extension of the board's patience, Marcus gathered his trusted inner circle. The group included Aisha, Eliza, the former FBI investigators, and a handful of loyal SkyHigh employees who had proven their commitment to the new culture. "We've confirmed that Veronica Walsh and Captain Hayes are coordinating the resistance," Marcus explained. "They have a network of approximately 20 key collaborators throughout the company, plus various sympathizers who aren't actively participating but turn a blind eye." "How are they communicating?" asked one of the investigators. They've created a secure messaging group using personal devices, Aisha explained. They're careful never to use company systems or discuss their activities on SkyHigh premises. So how do we catch them? Eliza questioned. Marcus smiled. We give them what they're expecting, me on their turf, vulnerable and unaware. The plan was audacious. Marcus would book a first-class ticket on a flight operated by Hayes and staffed by Veronica. He would appear to be traveling alone, giving them the perfect opportunity to continue their pattern of discrimination, now enhanced by personal animosity toward the man who had taken over their airline. Isn't that dangerously close to entrapment? Sophia worried. Not legally, one of the former FBI agents clarified. We're not law enforcement, and we're not inducing them to commit acts they wouldn't otherwise perform. We're simply creating conditions where they can reveal their true behavior. The preparations were elaborate. Marcus would alter his appearance slightly, growing a short beard, wearing glasses, using a different hairstyle, enough that he wouldn't be immediately recognizable to Veronica or Hayes when booking and boarding the flight. Meanwhile, the flight would be carefully monitored. Several of Marcus's trusted team members would be placed throughout the cabin as regular passengers, equipped with recording devices. Every communication system on the aircraft would be monitored for unusual activity. What if they don't take the bait? Aisha asked. Based on their pattern, they will, Marcus assured her. Their sabotage is escalating because they're desperate. They know they're losing the larger battle as we implement systemic changes. This will be irresistible to them, a chance to personally humiliate the man who threatened their power. As the plan took shape, Marcus received a concerning update from the forensic team examining the altered maintenance records. The falsifications are more sophisticated than we initially thought, the lead investigator reported. Whoever did this has extensive knowledge of FAA documentation requirements and SkyHigh's record-keeping systems. Hayes would have that knowledge, Marcus noted. Yes, but there's more. We've found evidence suggesting they may be planning to plant actual physical discrepancies before the next inspection phase. This raised the stakes dramatically. Document falsification was serious, but tampering with aircraft was potentially criminal and dangerous. We need to accelerate our timeline, Marcus decided. Book the flight for this weekend, and alert airport security at both departure and arrival points, discreetly. Tell them we're conducting a corporate security exercise. As the team dispersed to implement the plan, Marcus stood alone by the window overlooking the tarmac. Below, a SkyHigh plane taxied toward the runway, its new livery gleaming in the afternoon sun. So much had changed in the 6 months since his first experience with the airline. Yet the core challenge remained, transforming a culture that had normalized discrimination and retaliation. The flight was booked for Sunday morning, SkyHigh 867 from Boston to Chicago, with Captain Richard Hayes commanding and Veronica Walsh serving as lead flight attendant. It would be their first direct encounter since the acquisition had completed. As Sunday approached, Marcus reviewed every detail of the plan with military precision. Each team member knew their role. Recording devices were tested and secured. Background checks confirmed no leaks about the operation. Everything was in place for the confrontation that would determine the future of SkyHigh Airlines and potentially Marcus's career. Sunday morning arrived with crystal-clear skies over Boston, perfect flying conditions. Marcus stood before his bathroom mirror, applying the finishing touches to his disguise. The lightweight glasses, neatly trimmed beard, and subtly different hairstyle created an appearance that wouldn't immediately trigger recognition, especially since Veronica and Hayes were expecting the clean-shaven, designer-suited executive they'd seen in corporate communications. Today, Marcus wore slightly rumpled business-casual attire, the look of a moderately successful professional rather than a billionaire CEO. His wedding ring was missing, replaced by a class ring from a university he hadn't attended. Every detail had been considered. Testing, he murmured, checking the discreet recording device concealed in his watch. A tiny green light blinked in confirmation. At Logan International Airport, Marcus deliberately arrived just 40 minutes before departure. Enough. Time to make the flight, but not so early that he'd stand out in the premium waiting area. He kept his head down, ostensibly focused on his phone, as he moved through the terminal. His team was already in position. Eliza had boarded in economy, Class 20 minutes earlier, 2 former FBI investigators had separate seats in first class. Another team member was positioned as a gate agent, while Aisha monitored everything remotely from a secure room at SkyHigh headquarters. "Target on sight," Eliza's voice murmured in the nearly invisible earpiece Marcus wore. "Walsh is working. The boarding desk. Hayes just completed pre-flight checks and is visible in the cockpit." Marcus approached the first-class line, boarding pass and ID ready. When he reached Veronica, he presented his documents without making eye contact, playing the role of the distracted business traveler. Veronica glanced at his boarding pass, then at him. For a moment, her eyes narrowed slightly, but she showed no clear sign of recognition. "Enjoy your flight, Mr. Wilson," she said, using the alias he'd booked under. Marcus nodded and moved down the jetway. First hurdle cleared. As he settled into seat 3A, Marcus surveyed the cabin discreetly. Both undercover investigators were already seated, one across the aisle in 3C, another 2 rows ahead in 1D. The cabin was half full, with several more passengers still boarding. The true test would come during the flight. If Veronica and Hayes truly didn't recognize him, they might treat him normally. But his team had discovered a pattern. The flight crew routinely identified passengers of color in premium cabins for subtly diminished service, regardless of whether they recognized them personally. "Cabin secure," came the soft update in his earpiece as the door closed. "All recording devices active." The flight took off uneventfully. Captain Hayes' voice came over the intercom with the standard welcome announcement, giving no indication that anything was amiss. For the first 30 minutes, service proceeded normally. Veronica offered pre-departure beverages to all first-class passengers without obvious discrimination. Marcus began to wonder if their presence had been detected, causing the crew to be on their best behavior. Then came the first subtle sign. When distributing hot towels, Veronica clearly gave the white passengers fresher, steamier towels, while Marcus received one that was merely warm and slightly damp. It was a tiny slight that most passengers would never notice or complain about. Precisely the kind of pattern his investigation had uncovered. Discriminatory practices that were plausibly deniable individually, but formed a clear pattern collectively. As the meal service began, the differentiation became more noticeable. White passengers were given multiple options for each course. Marcus was simply handed plates without being offered choices. His wine glass was filled less generously, his coffee served without offering cream or sugar. Are they seriously still doing this with all the scrutiny the airline is under? Marcus wondered silently, documenting each discrepancy with subtle movements of his watch to capture the interactions. Approximately halfway through the flight, something changed. Veronica was checking something on her phone during a quiet moment in the galley when her demeanor suddenly shifted. She stared at her screen, then looked directly at Marcus with widened eyes. "She's made you," Eliza murmured in his earpiece. "She just received a message." Sure enough, within minutes, Veronica's entire approach transformed. She appeared at Marcus's seat with an overly solicitous smile. "Mr. Wilson, is everything to your satisfaction today? Can I get you anything special? Perhaps some champagne?" The abrupt change was almost comical. From subtle discrimination to excessive accommodation in the span of minutes. Marcus maintained his role, responding politely but briefly, giving no indication he'd noticed the shift. Meanwhile, the cockpit door opened briefly as the co-pilot stepped out. Veronica intercepted him, whispering urgently. The co-pilot's eyes darted toward Marcus before he hurried back to the cockpit. "Hayes has been alerted," came the update in Marcus's earpiece. The remainder of the flight became an increasingly bizarre performance. Veronica hovered near Marcus's seat, offering additional snacks, drinks, even a premium amenity kit that hadn't been distributed to other passengers. The overcorrection was as revealing as the initial discrimination had been. Then came the moment they had anticipated. As Veronica leaned across to refill Marcus's water glass, her hand slipped, sending a cascade of ice water across his lap. "Oh my goodness!" she exclaimed with theatrical dismay. "I'm so terribly sorry, sir." Marcus remained perfectly calm, accepting the napkins she frantically offered. "These things happen," he said mildly. "Such an unfortunate accident. noted the investigator seated across the aisle, loud enough for others to hear. Strange how stable her hand was with every other passenger. Did you notice the calculated way Veronica's behavior changed once she recognized Marcus? Comment number 1. If you think her fake hospitality was worse than her initial discrimination, or number 2, if you believe people deserve second chances even after showing their true colors. Don't forget to like this video if you're shocked by how far some people will go to maintain their power, and subscribe to see the justice that's coming in the next part. What would you do if you were in Marcus's shoes? Accept the sudden special treatment or confront the hypocrisy directly? The tension in this flight is building to something explosive. As the accident unfolded, other passengers began taking notice of the strange dynamics in the first-class cabin. Several had their phones out, recording the interaction. Damage. Control initiated, Veronica announced loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. Sir, please allow me to offer you our premium customer care package for this unfortunate incident. Marcus accepted the offered kit with a neutral expression that revealed nothing of his awareness of the orchestrated nature of the accident. Meanwhile, Captain Hayes' voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some minor technical difficulties with our communication system. Nothing to be concerned about, but we may need to adjust our approach into Chicago. This announcement triggered immediate alerts among Marcus's team. That's not true, confirmed their aviation expert via the earpiece. All communication systems are functioning normally. He's creating a pretext for something, Marcus realized. He discreetly texted Aisha, "Monitor all communications from the cockpit." Within minutes, they had their answer. Hayes had attempted to contact SkyHigh's former VP of Operations, now demoted but still employed, claiming an urgent situation required a gate change in Chicago. The true purpose was clear: to arrange for security personnel loyal to the old management to meet the flight. He's trying to create a controlled environment for when we land, Marcus realized. Somewhere they can manage the narrative. What Hayes didn't know was that every communication was being monitored, and Marcus's team had already alerted Chicago O'Hare's tower to the situation. No unauthorized gate changes would be approved. The flight crew's desperation became increasingly evident as they approached Chicago. Veronica and 2 other flight attendants held a hushed conference in the galley, repeatedly glancing toward Marcus. Captain Hayes made another announcement about routing changes due to weather on what was a perfectly clear day throughout the Midwest. 20 minutes from landing, Veronica made her most brazen move yet. As she passed Marcus's seat, she stumbled dramatically, sending a cup of hot coffee directly into his lap. "Oh no," she gasped with exaggerated horror. "I'm so terribly sorry." The burn was real, the coffee painfully hot. Marcus winced but maintained his composure, even as his investigators and several passengers reacted with outrage. "That's the second accident targeting the same passenger," noted a woman seated nearby. "I've been recording this entire flight and I've never seen such unprofessional behavior." Veronica's face flushed as she realized multiple passengers were documenting the incident. Her plan to provoke Marcus into an angry response, giving them something to use against him, had backfired spectacularly. "We have medical personnel available," she stammered, her confident facade cracking. "I'm fine," Marcus stated calmly, dabbing at the stain with napkins, "though I'd appreciate no more beverages for the remainder of the flight." The tension in the cabin was palpable as they began their descent into O'Hare. Passengers whispered among themselves, pointing discreetly toward Marcus and the flight attendants. What had begun as an ordinary Sunday morning flight had transformed into a stage for corporate drama that no one quite understood, except Marcus and his team. As they approached the gate, Captain Hayes made one final attempt to regain control of the situation. His voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to congestion at our assigned gate, we've been directed to a remote stand. Ground transportation will meet the aircraft to bring you to the terminal." It was a bold lie, and one easily disproven by the controllers in the tower, who immediately denied any such instruction and firmly directed Flight 867 to its originally assigned gate at Terminal 1. When the aircraft finally parked at the gate, Hayes made no move to open the door, attempting one last delay tactic. This too failed when ground personnel, alerted to the situation, overrode the exterior controls. As passengers began to disembark, Marcus remained in his seat, watching as Veronica and the other flight attendants frantically whispered among themselves. Their carefully orchestrated plan had unraveled at every turn. Now they faced the moment of truth. Marcus waited until most passengers had departed before standing. As he moved toward the exit, Captain Hayes emerged from the cockpit, positioning himself near the door in what appeared to be a last-ditch effort to control the situation. What Hayes didn't anticipate was the welcome committee waiting in the jet bridge, airport security, SkyHigh's new head of operations, and several members of Marcus's executive team. The game was over before Hayes even realized it had begun. As Marcus approached the exit, Hayes stepped forward, his imposing figure blocking the way. "Mr. Wilson," he said, emphasizing the false name with a smirk, "I hope these minor inconveniences won't affect your perception of our airline." Marcus finally removed his glasses and looked directly at Hayes. "Actually, Captain Hayes, these minor inconveniences have told me everything I need to know about how you run your aircraft. Or should I say, how you used to run your aircraft." The color drained from Hayes' face as recognition dawned. "Daniels," he muttered. "That's right," Marcus confirmed, loud enough for everyone in the cabin to hear. "Marcus Daniels, CEO of Pinnacle Innovations and now owner of SkyHigh Airlines, the airline where you and Ms. Walsh have been deliberately sabotaging operations, falsifying safety records, and continuing to discriminate against passengers despite multiple warnings." Hayes' shock quickly hardened into defiance. "You've got nothing on us. This was one bad flight with some unfortunate accidents." "We have everything," Marcus corrected him. "Every altered record, every sabotage attempt, every discriminatory action. And now, thanks to your performance today, we have irrefutable evidence of your willingness to compromise passenger safety for personal vendettas." As Marcus stepped past Hayes onto the jet bridge, the captain made his final desperate move, reaching out to physically block Marcus's path while towering over him menacingly. "You tech guys think you can buy and destroy whatever you want," Hayes snarled. "You know nothing about running an airline." The security officers moved forward immediately, but Marcus raised a hand to halt them. He wanted this moment documented completely. "I may not have spent 25 years flying planes, Captain Hayes," Marcus replied calmly, "but I know that leadership starts with respect. Respect for every passenger, employee, and stakeholder, regardless of their appearance. That's a lesson you clearly never learned." Cameras flashed as Hayes, realizing he was being recorded from multiple angles, finally stepped aside. The confrontation had provided the perfect final piece of evidence. SkyHigh's most senior captain physically intimidating the company's CEO while being recorded by multiple witnesses. As Marcus walked through the terminal surrounded by his team and security, he knew the most difficult phase of the acquisition had just reached its turning point. The saboteurs had exposed themselves completely, giving him everything needed to complete the transformation of SkyHigh Airlines. The footage of Captain Hayes intimidating Marcus went viral within hours. SkyHigh Showdown trended across social media platforms as passengers from Flight 867 shared their recordings and accounts of the discrimination they'd witnessed. Marcus could have leveraged the public relations windfall immediately, but instead, he chose a more measured approach. The morning after the flight, he called an all-hands meeting at SkyHigh headquarters. "Yesterday, many of you witnessed or heard about an incident on Flight 867, Marcus began, addressing hundreds of employees in person and thousands more watching via video link. What happened on that flight represents the final chapter of an old SkyHigh culture, one that tolerated discrimination, retaliation, and even sabotage." The room was silent as Marcus detailed the evidence they'd gathered over the past months. The altered maintenance records, the coordinated service disruptions, the pattern of discrimination documented by customers and whistleblowers. Effective. Immediately, Captain Richard Hayes, Flight Attendant Veronica Walsh, and 18 other employees involved in these activities have been suspended pending formal termination proceedings, Marcus announced. "This isn't about retribution. It's about establishing that certain behaviors have no place in the SkyHigh family." As Marcus continued outlining his vision for the airline's future, his team was executing a carefully orchestrated security operation throughout the company. Digital access was revoked for all suspended employees. Their personal effects were collected from lockers and workstations. Security escorts stood ready to prevent any attempt to remove or destroy evidence. What Marcus didn't anticipate was the desperation of Hayes and his allies. While the all-hands meeting was underway, Hayes arrived at O'Hare Airport in civilian clothes, using his credentials to bypass regular security channels. His target, a SkyHigh maintenance hangar where a major inspection was scheduled for the following day. Airport surveillance captured Hayes entering the restricted area and approaching a recently serviced aircraft. What happened next was blocked from camera view, but maintenance workers reported finding evidence of tampering during their pre-inspection checks hours later. Meanwhile, Veronica Walsh made her own desperate move. Using a flight attendant's knowledge of aircraft systems, she contacted several crews currently in the air, spreading alarming misinformation about Pinnacle's plans for mass layoffs and route cancellations. "She's trying to incite panic among in-flight crews," Aisha reported urgently, when the first distressed calls from pilots began coming in. Marcus immediately authorized emergency communications to all airborne SkyHigh flights, clarifying that no operational changes were being implemented while planes were in the air and that all crews should continue normal procedures. "Patch me directly to any captains expressing concerns," Marcus instructed. "They need to hear from me personally. That passenger safety remains our absolute priority regardless of any management changes." The situation escalated when one captain, a close associate of Hayes, announced to his passengers that, due to dangerous management decisions beyond our control, he was diverting his New York to Miami flight to a smaller regional airport where Hayes had connections. Air traffic control, already alerted to potential disruptions, firmly denied the diversion request and instructed the captain to maintain his filed flight plan. When he initially resisted, citing vague technical considerations, the controller's response was unequivocal. SkyHigh 392, be advised that unauthorized diversion without verifiable mechanical necessity will trigger emergency protocols including potential interception. Confirm you are continuing to your authorized destination, over. The implied threat of fighter jet escort was enough to ensure compliance. The captain reluctantly acknowledged and continued to Miami as scheduled. Back at headquarters, Marcus and his team worked frantically to contain the escalating crisis. Every SkyHigh aircraft was now being closely monitored by both air traffic control and company dispatch. FAA officials, concerned about the potential safety implications, had embedded representatives in SkyHigh's operations center. "This is unprecedented," noted Eliza as they tracked the status of all airborne flights. "They're literally trying to hijack our entire operation in a last-ditch effort to undermine us." "Which tells us exactly how desperate they are," Marcus responded grimly. "They know this is their last stand." The crisis peaked when Hayes, apparently learning his maintenance sabotage had been discovered, attempted to contact his diverted captain friend using unauthorized communication channels. Both the call and his presence at the airport were detected by security, leading to his immediate detention by airport police. By evening, the most immediate dangers had been contained. All SkyHigh flights had either safely reached their destinations or were proceeding normally under heightened monitoring. Hayes was in custody pending charges for attempted sabotage of aircraft equipment, a federal offense carrying severe penalties. Veronica and other conspirators had been located and removed from company premises. As the crisis management team finally paused for a late dinner, Marcus received an unexpected call from Eleanor Graves at the regulatory agency. "Mr. Daniels," she began without preamble, "I've been briefed on today's events. The agency is prepared to offer any necessary support to ensure operational continuity and safety at SkyHigh." "Thank you, Commissioner," Marcus replied, surprised by the offer. "Don't thank me yet," she continued. "This situation will trigger mandatory reviews of all SkyHigh safety protocols and corporate governance. However, given the evidence that the previous management culture was actively undermining safety rather than your team, we'll approach this constructively." The call represented a significant shift from regulatory skepticism to cautious partnership. It was the first indication that the broader aviation community recognized Marcus was fighting to improve SkyHigh, not dismantle it. As news of the day's events spread throughout the company and the industry, Marcus received another unexpected communication, this time from SkyHigh's pilots' union representatives requesting an urgent meeting. "We need to talk," the union president stated bluntly. "Many of our members had no idea what Hayes and his group were doing. We want to distance ourselves from their actions and discuss how we can support the transition constructively." Similar messages arrived from the flight attendants union and ground workers representatives. The unified front of resistance was crumbling as employees recognized that the old guard had crossed unacceptable lines. By midnight, Marcus and his team had established a new temporary command structure for flight operations, maintenance, and customer service. The most critical positions previously held by Hayes' allies were now filled with experienced aviation professionals who had either been marginalized under the old regime or brought in from respected competitors. As the crisis team finally disbanded in the early morning hours, Marcus stood alone in the operations center, watching the display screens tracking SkyHigh aircraft moving steadily across digital maps. Despite the tumultuous day, every flight was now proceeding normally. Passengers were reaching their destinations safely, most completely unaware of the corporate battle that had nearly disrupted their travel. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, media inquiries, regulatory scrutiny, passenger concerns. But tonight, in the quiet of the operations center, Marcus allowed himself a moment of cautious optimism. The worst of the resistance had revealed itself and failed. Now the real work of transformation could begin. The morning after the airborne confrontation brought a flurry of activity at Chicago O'Hare International Airport. News crews gathered at Terminal 1, hoping to capture footage of the corporate drama that had spilled into public view. Airport security had established a perimeter to maintain order, but the usual morning bustle was disrupted by the unusual media presence. Marcus arrived at 7 a.m., flanked by Eliza and Sophia. They had scheduled a press conference to address the previous day's events before rumors and speculation could damage SkyHigh's reputation further. "Remember, this isn't about personal vindication," Sophia cautioned as they approached the makeshift podium. "This is about passenger safety and corporate responsibility." Marcus nodded. The press conference would be a defining moment, not just for SkyHigh, but for his leadership of Pinnacle Innovations. His board was watching closely, still uncertain whether the airline acquisition had been strategic genius or personal folly. Camera flashes erupted as Marcus stepped to the microphones. Dozens of reporters jostled for position, shouting questions before he could even speak. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, raising his hands for quiet. "Yesterday, SkyHigh Airlines experienced what I can only describe as an attempted corporate mutiny. A small group of employees, unhappy with our efforts to transform the airline's culture, engaged in a coordinated campaign of disruption that culminated in attempts to compromise flight safety." The statement silenced the crowd momentarily. Marcus continued, his voice steady and authoritative. "The individuals responsible have been identified and removed from duty. Federal authorities are investigating potential criminal charges related to aircraft tampering and interference with flight crew duties. I want to emphasize that at no time were passengers in actual danger, thanks to the vigilance of our maintenance teams and the intervention of air traffic control." As Marcus outlined the events, video screens behind him displayed footage from Flight 867, showing the discriminatory service, the accidental spills, and ultimately Hayes' physical intimidation attempt. The evidence was compelling and undeniable. "This behavior represents everything we're working to change at SkyHigh," Marcus explained. "For too long, certain employees believed they could treat passengers differently based on appearance or background. When challenged, they chose sabotage over accountability." Reporters peppered Marcus with questions about his undercover operation, Hayes' arrest, and the future of the airline. He answered each methodically, never losing his composure even when the queries became pointed. "Mr. Daniels," called out a reporter from a major business publication, "critics are saying this entire situation stems from your personal vendetta after one bad flight experience. How do you respond?" "I'd invite those critics to review the evidence we've assembled," Marcus replied. What began with my experience led to the discovery of hundreds of similar incidents affecting passengers across all demographics, though disproportionately targeting minorities. This wasn't about one flight or one passenger. It was about a systemic problem that required systematic change. As the press conference concluded, Marcus introduced several passengers from Flight 867 who had volunteered to share their observations. Their first-hand accounts of the discrimination they'd witnessed provided powerful corroboration. "I fly first class every week for business," stated a prominent surgeon who had been seated near Marcus. "What I saw on that flight wasn't just poor service, it was deliberate targeting. And when I checked my own previous experiences with SkyHigh, more critically, I realized this wasn't new. I just hadn't been paying close enough attention." Airport security reported that crowds of travelers had gathered around terminal televisions to watch the press conference, many nodding in recognition of experiences they themselves had encountered. Meanwhile, across town, Captain Hayes was being arraigned on federal charges. The evidence against him was substantial: security footage of his unauthorized hangar entry, maintenance records documenting the tampering, and testimony from colleagues he'd tried to recruit for his sabotage campaign. Veronica Walsh faced her own legal troubles. Prosecutors were reviewing charges related to assault, the coffee accident, and interference with flight crew duties. Her attorney was already floating the possibility of a plea deal in exchange for testimony against Hayes, suggesting the unified resistance was fracturing under pressure. By mid-afternoon, Marcus had relocated to SkyHigh's Chicago Operations Center to oversee the airline's recovery plan. Passenger confidence had been shaken by the public confrontation, and bookings were down across all routes. "We need to be transparent but reassuring," Marcus told his communications team. "Every passenger should receive a personal message from me acknowledging what happened and detailing the steps we're taking to ensure it never happens again." The team worked through the night drafting communications, updating training protocols and reorganizing flight operations leadership. By morning, a comprehensive recovery plan was in place. What Marcus hadn't anticipated was the wave of employee support that emerged in the aftermath. Dozens of SkyHigh staff contacted management with additional information about Hayes' network, eager to distance themselves from the toxic elements of the old culture. "It's like a dam breaking," Aisha observed as she reviewed the incoming reports. "Many people knew what was happening but were afraid to speak up. Now they see it's safe to come forward." The most significant development came when 3 former SkyHigh executives contacted Marcus requesting meetings. Each had left the company during the previous administration, allegedly for performance reasons. In reality, all 3 had raised concerns about discriminatory practices and been systematically pushed out. They were the right people all along, Marcus realized. We need to bring them back if they're willing. Within 24 hours of the showdown, the narrative had shifted dramatically. What Hayes and Veronica had intended as a public humiliation of Marcus had instead exposed their own misconduct to the world. Media coverage that might have questioned Pinnacle's management of the airline was now focused on the corrupt culture that had existed before the acquisition. Even the regulatory response was changing. The FAA audit team, initially hostile based on Hayes' falsified reports, now approached their review as a collaborative effort to identify any remaining safety concerns planted by the saboteurs. "They're actually helping us clean house," reported the operations director with evident relief. On the 3rd day after the Flight 867 incident, Marcus received an unexpected visitor at SkyHigh headquarters. Janet Wilson, the scheduling department employee, who had reported Aisha's meeting with Marcus months earlier, arrived without an appointment, visibly nervous. "I need to speak with Mr. Daniels," she told the receptionist. "It's important." Marcus agreed to the meeting, curious about her intentions. When Janet entered his office, she immediately broke down in tears. "I've been part of their system," she confessed. "Not the sabotage, I never knew about that, but the other things. When minority candidates applied for premium routes, I was told to schedule them for less desirable assignments. When passengers filed discrimination complaints, I directed them to specific customer service reps who would minimize the response." Her testimony provided the missing link between individual discriminatory actions and the institutional systems that enabled them. With Janet's cooperation, Marcus's team could now map the entire infrastructure of bias that had been built into SkyHigh's operations. By the end of the week, the immediate crisis had stabilized. Flights were operating normally. The saboteurs had been removed, and passengers were cautiously returning as media coverage highlighted the positive changes underway. The final confrontation with the old guard came unexpectedly through legal channels. Hayes' attorney filed an aggressive countersuit claiming wrongful termination and defamation. The lawsuit named not just the airline but Marcus personally, seeking damages that would cripple both. It's a desperate move, Sophia assessed after reviewing the filing. The evidence against him is overwhelming. He's hoping we'll settle to avoid prolonged negative publicity. We won't, Marcus decided immediately. No settlements, no confidentiality agreements. Everything gets aired in court if that's what they want. The lawsuit proved to be Hayes' final miscalculation. By filing, he gave Pinnacle's legal team discovery rights to his personal communications, financial records, and employment history. What they uncovered went far beyond discrimination and sabotage. Evidence emerged of kickback schemes with vendors, manipulation of maintenance scheduling to favor certain crews, and systematic harassment of employees who questioned his authority. The full extent of corruption under the previous regime was far worse than Marcus had imagined. As this evidence became public through court filings, any remaining support for Hayes and his allies evaporated. The unions formally disavowed them, current employees volunteered additional testimony against them, and industry publications that had initially questioned Pinnacle's acquisition now praised the cleanup effort. The landing showdown had been decisive. What began as a personal confrontation between Marcus and a discriminatory flight crew had evolved into a complete repudiation of a toxic corporate culture. The path forward was now clear, not just for Flight 867, but for SkyHigh Airlines as a whole. 1 month after the showdown at O'Hare, Marcus stood before SkyHigh's assembled executive team in the renovated boardroom. The walls, once adorned with photos of aircraft, now displayed the airline's new mission statement. Exceptional service for every passenger without exception. Today marks an important milestone, Marcus announced. The independent review of all discrimination claims is complete. The investigation, conducted by a respected civil rights law firm, had examined over 500 passenger complaints filed during the previous 3 years. The findings were sobering. Clear patterns of discriminatory treatment based on race, ethnicity, and perceived socioeconomic status. Every substantiated claim will receive both formal apology and appropriate compensation, Marcus continued. More importantly, we've identified the systemic failures that allowed these patterns to develop and persist. The remediation plan was comprehensive: new training protocols for all customer-facing staff, revised service standards with explicit anti-discrimination provisions, independent auditors to conduct regular service quality reviews, and a restructured complaint process that ensured transparency and accountability. This isn't just about legal compliance, Marcus emphasized. It's about building the airline we want to be. The repercussions of Flight 867 had extended far beyond SkyHigh. The dramatic footage of Captain Hayes' intimidation attempt and Veronica's deliberate accidents had sparked industry-wide conversations about discrimination in air travel. Congressional representatives had announced hearings on passenger rights and treatment standards. Other airlines were rushing to review their own practices and policies. Meanwhile, criminal proceedings against Hayes and his co-conspirators were advancing. The aircraft tampering charges alone carried potential prison sentences, and prosecutors had added wire fraud, conspiracy, and civil rights violations to the indictment. Most defendants were already negotiating plea agreements, turning on each other in a desperate attempt to minimize consequences. Veronica Walsh had been the first to break, offering comprehensive testimony against Hayes in exchange for leniency. Her detailed account of how the discrimination system operated, how crew members identified problem passengers for diminished service, how complaints were buried, how whistleblowers were silenced, provided a roadmap for the reforms now underway. For Marcus personally, the aftermath of Flight 867 had brought vindication on multiple fronts. Pinnacle's board, initially skeptical of the airline acquisition, now recognized its strategic value. The company's stock had rebounded as investors, recognized the potential in a reformed SkyHigh. Even the most critical business publications acknowledged that Marcus had uncovered and addressed a significant corporate ethics failure. "The customer response has exceeded our projections," Eliza reported during the executive meeting. "Bookings are up 15% month over month. Our customer satisfaction metrics show particular improvement among minority passengers." The transformation wasn't complete, of course. Changing a corporate culture required more than policy revisions and leadership changes. It demanded consistent reinforcement, constant vigilance, and time for new habits to become ingrained. To that end, Marcus had implemented what he called experience audits. Anonymous reviewers from diverse backgrounds who regularly traveled on SkyHigh flights and reported on their treatment. The resulting data allowed the company to identify areas where old patterns might be persisting despite the new policies. Additionally, Marcus had established a passenger advocacy board composed of individuals who had experienced discrimination on SkyHigh in the past. Their perspective and ongoing input ensured that the airline's reforms weren't merely cosmetic. "We want to be held accountable," Marcus explained when announcing the board. "Not just for legal compliance, but for creating an environment where every passenger feels valued and respected." The industry impact was perhaps the most surprising outcome. As details of SkyHigh's transformation became public, passengers began questioning practices at other airlines. Social media campaigns emerged with hashtags like "How was your flight?" and "First class for all," encouraging travelers to document and share disparities in treatment. Several major carriers, seeing the shifting landscape, proactively announced their own service review initiatives. Industry associations began developing standardized anti-discrimination guidelines. What had begun as one passenger's negative experience was catalyzing systemic change across commercial aviation. Not everyone embraced the new direction, of course. A small faction of former SkyHigh executives, led by the airline's previous CEO, mounted a last-ditch effort to challenge Pinnacle's control. Using their industry connections and remaining shareholder influence, they attempted to orchestrate a hostile takeover of Pinnacle itself. "They've secured backing from Meridian Capital," reported James Chen during an emergency strategy session. "They're positioning it as a rescue of a technology company that's lost its way by venturing into unrelated industries." The takeover attempt was ambitious, but fundamentally flawed. Pinnacle's financial position remained strong, its core technology business was thriving, and the SkyHigh acquisition was now showing positive returns. Most importantly, Marcus had built strong relationships with his major shareholders, who recognized the strategic vision behind his decisions. When the formal takeover offer arrived, Pinnacle's board unanimously rejected it. The message was clear. The transformation of SkyHigh wasn't a distraction from Pinnacle's mission. It was an extension of its commitment to using technology and ethical leadership to improve customer experiences across industries. The failed takeover marked the final gasp of resistance from the old SkyHigh regime. With their legal, regulatory, and financial options exhausted, the former executives finally retreated, leaving Marcus and his team to complete the airline's reinvention. 6 months after Flight 867, the tangible results of that reinvention were becoming clear. SkyHigh's customer satisfaction ratings had climbed from near bottom to industry leading. Employee morale, as measured by independent surveys, showed similar improvement. The airline's financial performance had stabilized, with profits returning after years of losses. Most significantly, SkyHigh had become known for something new: its commitment to equitable, exceptional service for every passenger. Travel publications that once warned minority travelers about potential discrimination now highlighted SkyHigh as a model of inclusive practices. For Marcus, the transformation represented something more personal. What began as a response to his own humiliating experience had evolved into a case study in corporate responsibility and ethical leadership. The changes at SkyHigh would outlast any individual flight, passenger, or even CEO. As he concluded the executive meeting, Marcus shared a letter he'd received that morning from a passenger. "I've been flying for 30 years, the letter read, "and as a person of color, I've grown accustomed to subtle slights and diminished service, especially in premium cabins. My recent SkyHigh experience was different. For the first time, I felt truly valued as a customer, not despite who I am, but as who I am. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. That simple acknowledgement, Marcus reflected, was the true measure of success. Not stock prices or publicity, but the human impact of institutional change. Corporate justice, when properly applied, could transform not just companies, but individual experiences and collective expectations. The journey that began with a denied meal had led to something far more substantial. A template for addressing discrimination, not through symbolic gestures or damage control, but through systematic reform and genuine accountability. 1 year to the day after Marcus's fateful first flight on SkyHigh, he stood in the first-class cabin of a specially chartered aircraft, preparing for a landmark journey. The flight, designated SkyHigh 1, would retrace the Boston to Chicago route that had sparked the entire transformation. Unlike that original flight, today's aircraft gleamed with SkyHigh's redesigned livery, the traditional logo now accented with symbols representing diversity and inclusion. The cabin crew, selected from the airline's most highly rated professionals, moved efficiently through pre-departure preparations. "All systems check complete, Mr. Daniels," reported the captain, Sarah Johnson. Formerly a pilot relegated to regional routes despite her exemplary record, Captain Johnson now led SkyHigh's Flight Operations Training Division. Her promotion symbolized the meritocratic culture that had replaced the old system of favorites and connections. The passenger list for this symbolic flight included a cross-section of those who had contributed to SkyHigh's rebirth. Whistleblowers like Aisha, who had risked their careers to expose wrongdoing. Passengers who had documented discrimination and pursued complaints despite institutional resistance. The civil rights attorneys who had helped develop new service protocols. And journalists who had covered the story with integrity rather than sensationalism. "This isn't just a celebration," Marcus had explained when planning the event. "It's an acknowledgement that corporate transformation requires courage from many quarters." As passengers boarded, each received a commemorative journal documenting SkyHigh's journey from discrimination to exemplar. The book included unflinching accounts of past failures, alongside the specific reforms implemented to address them. It was a level of transparency unprecedented in corporate America, acknowledging historical wrongs as a foundation for lasting change. While the atmosphere was celebratory, Marcus remained mindful of the challenges still ahead. The aviation industry's legacy practices weren't easily dismantled, and vigilance would be required to prevent regression. Already, competitors were adopting SkyHigh's innovations while attempting to minimize the discrimination issues that had necessitated them. They want the positive publicity without the painful self-examination, Aisha had observed during their last strategy session. That competitive pressure was actually accelerating SkyHigh's progress. To maintain their leadership position, they needed to continuously enhance their approach to inclusive service. The airline had established an innovation lab dedicated solely to improving passenger experience across all demographics, ensuring that service standards evolved with changing expectations. Financial results validated the strategy. SkyHigh's customer retention rates had increased by 24% year over year. Acquisition costs for new customers had decreased as positive word-of-mouth reduced marketing requirements. Most significantly, premium cabin bookings by minority travelers had tripled, representing a market segment that competitors had effectively underserved for decades. As the celebration flight reached cruising altitude, Marcus moved through the cabin, conversing with guests and collecting additional insights for future improvements. When he reached Terrence Washington, the customer service manager whose documentation had exposed systematic discrimination, the conversation turned reflective. "Did you ever imagine we'd get here?" Terrence asked, gesturing around the cabin, where diverse passengers were receiving consistently excellent service. "Not initially," Marcus admitted. "When I first experienced discrimination on SkyHigh, my reaction was primarily personal. I wanted accountability for that specific incident. It was only after connecting with people like you and Aisha that I understood the true scope of the problem and the opportunity." "Opportunity," Terrence repeated thoughtfully. "That's what separates this from other corporate diversity initiatives I've seen. You didn't approach this as damage control or compliance. You saw the business potential in genuinely serving everyone well. Marcus nodded. Excellence doesn't discriminate. When you remove artificial barriers and biases, you discover talent, customers, and possibilities that were always there but undervalued. That philosophy had extended beyond SkyHigh's passenger service to transform its entire business approach. The airline had implemented blind recruitment processes that focused exclusively on qualifications and skills, resulting in significantly more diverse hiring outcomes. Promotion criteria had been standardized and made transparent, eliminating the favoritism that had previously determined career advancement. These internal changes had generated external recognition. SkyHigh had received industry awards for workforce development, operational excellence, and customer satisfaction. Business. Schools were developing case studies examining how addressing discrimination had improved overall performance metrics. Most gratifying to Marcus was the impact on individuals. Flight attendants who had been relegated to less desirable routes now served premium cabins based on performance ratings. Maintenance technicians who had been passed over for advancement now led teams based on demonstrated expertise. Pilots who had been stuck in regional operations now commanded international flights based on experience and capability. As SkyHigh 1 began its descent into Chicago, Marcus returned to his seat for the landing. Looking out the window at the approaching skyline, he reflected on the journey. Not just the physical distance between Boston and Chicago, but the organizational transformation from discriminatory airline to industry leader. The most poignant moment came after landing, as passengers disembarked at O'Hare's Terminal 1, the same location where Marcus had confronted Captain Hayes a year earlier. Where once there had been tension and confrontation, today there was celebration and progress. Airport staff had prepared a small reception area where Chicago's aviation commissioner waited to greet the arriving passengers. The local recognition was particularly meaningful given the pivotal role O'Hare had played in SkyHigh's transformation story. Mr. Daniels, the commissioner began after formal introductions, what your team has accomplished extends beyond one airline. You've raised standards and expectations across our airport. Passenger complaints about discriminatory treatment have decreased 30% overall since your reforms became public. This ripple effect had been an unexpected but welcome outcome of SkyHigh's journey. Other airlines, seeing both the moral imperative and business advantage of inclusive service, had implemented their own reforms. Airport authorities had revised vendor requirements to include anti-discrimination provisions. Industry associations had developed new training standards addressing implicit bias and equitable service. Congressional hearings on passenger treatment had resulted in enhanced reporting requirements for airlines regarding service disparities and complaint resolution. The Department of Transportation had established a dedicated office to address discrimination in air travel. What began as one passenger's experience had catalyzed systemic change throughout commercial aviation. For Marcus personally, the SkyHigh transformation had reinforced his core business philosophy, that ethical leadership and commercial success were not competing priorities but complementary strategies. Pinnacle innovations continued to thrive. Under his guidance, with the SkyHigh acquisition now recognized as a visionary move that extended the company's impact beyond its traditional technology base. As the reception concluded and guests departed for their various destinations, Marcus remained briefly with Aisha, who had recently been promoted to SkyHigh's executive leadership team as Chief Customer Experience Officer. 1 year ago, I was afraid to speak up about what I witnessed on your flight, she reflected. Now I'm responsible for ensuring every passenger receives exceptional service. Your journey parallels the airlines, Marcus observed. From fear to empowerment, from silence to leadership. There's still work to do, Aisha acknowledged. Old habits don't disappear overnight, and we constantly discover new areas for improvement. Progress isn't perfection, Marcus agreed. It's the commitment to continuous improvement and the courage to acknowledge when we fall short. That commitment was being tested even as they spoke. Earlier that morning, Marcus had received word that Veronica Walsh and Richard Hayes, now unemployable in aviation following their legal troubles, had been spotted meeting with executives from a competing technology company. Intelligence suggested they were sharing information about Pinnacle's operations, possibly laying groundwork for corporate espionage or another takeover attempt. Marcus had immediately alerted Pinnacle's security team and informed Aisha, who had enhanced her own department's vigilance. The threat was being taken seriously but without panic. After all they had overcome, this potential challenge seemed manageable by comparison. What neither Marcus nor Aisha knew was that their security measures had already intercepted Hayes and Walsh attempting to access restricted areas at Pinnacle's satellite office near O'Hare. The pair had been detained by building security and were currently being questioned by corporate investigators. The final irony of the situation emerged later that evening when Marcus received the security report in his hotel suite. The officer who had identified Hayes and prevented his unauthorized entry was none other than Terrence Washington's cousin, recently hired as part of SkyHigh's reformed security team after being rejected multiple times under the previous management, due to lack of cultural fit. Justice comes full circle, Marcus thought as he reviewed the report. The attempted sabotage, the last desperate move by those who had lost power and position through their own discriminatory actions, had been thwarted by the very reforms they had fought so hard to prevent. The new SkyHigh, built on principles of equity and merit, had proven more resilient than the old system of favoritism and bias. As Marcus prepared for bed, his phone chimed with one final message for the day. It was from a passenger who had been on the original flight where he'd been denied a meal, a witness who had recognized the discrimination but, like so many, remained silent at the time. Saw the news about SkyHigh's transformation anniversary. The message read, "I regret not speaking up when I saw how you were treated. Thank you for doing what I didn't have the courage to do. My family now flies SkyHigh exclusively because we know we'll all be treated with respect." It was a fitting conclusion to the anniversary day, a reminder that corporate justice, when properly implemented, created ripples that extended far beyond balance sheets and brand reputation. It changed individual experiences, restored dignity, and ultimately transformed expectations of what was possible in business and society. The denied meal that had sparked Marcus's acquisition journey had ultimately nourished something far more substantial, a vision of corporate leadership where ethical imperatives and business success reinforced rather than competed with each other. As he drifted off to sleep, Marcus felt something rare in corporate America, the satisfaction of victory that served not just shareholders but humanity. The journey of Marcus Daniels and SkyHigh Airlines teaches us powerful lessons about confronting discrimination in corporate America. First, meaningful change often requires more than individual complaints. It demands systemic transformation, driven by those with the power and determination to challenge entrenched cultures. Second, discriminatory practices rarely exist in isolation. They typically indicate deeper organizational problems that affect operations, talent development, and ultimately profitability. Third, true leadership means acting with both strategic vision and moral clarity. The story also reveals that organizational transformation is never easy or immediate. It requires identifying cultural enablers, gathering irrefutable evidence, building alliances with internal advocates, and having the courage to persist despite resistance. Most importantly, it demonstrates that addressing discrimination isn't merely about correcting injustice, though that alone would be sufficient reason, but about unlocking the full potential of organizations by ensuring all employees and customers are treated with dignity and respect. When businesses recognize that equity and excellence are complementary rather than competing values, they discover untapped markets, underutilized talent, and opportunities for innovation that discrimination had previously obscured. Marcus's journey reminds us that ethical leadership and business success can and should reinforce each other, creating value for shareholders while advancing justice for all. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and wished you had the power to change an entire system? Comment below with your experiences standing up against unfair treatment. Would you have had the courage to take the dramatic steps Marcus did? Or would you have chosen a different approach? Type, "Justice served." If you felt satisfaction when the discriminatory crew finally faced consequences for their actions, don't forget to like this video if you believe in holding corporations accountable, and subscribe for more powerful stories about confronting injustice in unexpected ways. Thank you for watching this journey of transformation and accountability. May we all find the courage to speak truth to power when we encounter injustice, whether we have a billion-dollar company behind us or simply our own conviction of what's right.